Welcome, scholars. I hope everyone's doing well. I just want to take this opportunity to talk to you about attitudes and values and how they might impact the working environment that we exist in and that we take part in. So, values and attitudes kind of have a connection between beliefs as we think about values and what they bring to us. So, values are an abstract ideal that guide one's thinking and behavior across situations, and they can stem from our parents, our experiences in childhood and throughout life. Maybe they come from a religious or spiritual beliefs as well. So values are usually relatively stable. They can, be influence behavior outside of our control or even awareness sometimes. But understanding them can really help us to self-manage and be more effective in influencing when it comes to others' attitudes and behaviors as well. And we'll talk about attitudes in just a moment. So Schwartz came up with this value theory. So he kind of thought, values are motivational and represent broad goals over time and are congruent when adjunct values are complementary. So when they're working together or when there's got this kind of connection between some other ideas when it comes to his value theories. And we see this representative kind of in his wheel here. So you broke this down into dimensions with some specific areas that are important. So our first dimension ranges from concern for welfare of others, the pursuit of one's own interests, so that self enhancement. So when we're kind of looking in what's best for us, what we're trying to accomplish on an inner level, just ourselves as individuals. The second dimension, as we move around the wheel, ranges from self-directed independence, open to change and conformity, just this kind of wanting to grow, open to ideas, new changes, things of that nature. Schwartz stressed that it's also relative importance. We give these two dimensions of opposing values that diverse our behavior. So it represents that diversity and how we change and how we take in information and maybe how we perceive information as well. He also proposed that TED Broad values guide behavior. So you talked about power and social status and prestige, achievement, personal success through demonstrating competence, hedonism, pleasure, and that inner side again, that inner being of us. You talked about self-direction, so independent thought and action, universalism, so understanding, appreciation, tolerance, and protection of the welfare of all people. You talked about benevolence, tradition, conformity, so restraint of actions, and then that security piece, so safety, harmony, stability. So he came up with the circle when we think about values and how our values are gained over experiences from our parents, how they kind of mold themselves to fit our needs and wants, and how they come to coexist with us and kind of represent us as a whole. So he came up with this wheel to kind of guide us on what those values look like and why they're important. So these value theories can really be important when it comes to supervising people, using Schwartz's motto to understand their values and motives for our workforce and understanding what's important to them, what they believe in, what those values are, can really help us connect with our workforce. This can help determine if your values are consistent with your goals and whether you're spending your time in a meaningful way. So relatively stable across time and situations. So this means that positive employee attitudes and motivation are greatest when the work environment is consistent with employee values as well. So just understanding what those value systems are of our employees so we can help engage them and motivate them to be better employees. So some other key things. So values tend to be vary across generations because they're influenced by events occurring during childhood. So think about those who grew up during the Vietnam War versus those who grew up during the 9/11 tragedy. How our values might have changed, how those experiences and those life events around us may have played a part in our values because as we already talked about, our values come from our parents, our experiences, the environment around us really play a huge part in shaping those values and what they look like for us. Personal values represent global beliefs that influence behavior across all situations. And then personal attitudes affect behavior via intentions. So, as we start talking about attitudes, we're talking about our feelings or opinions about people, places, and objects, and range from positive to negative. And when we apply that to workplace, an outcome of various related processes such as leadership, managers conduct attitude surveys to monitor workplace attitudes like job satisfaction and employee engagement. So as we move from that value system to the attitudes, we kind of see this connection that takes place between those two areas. So managers can be better supervisors by using sports model to understand their values and motivation. If a manager knows that an employee values universalism and benevolence, then it would be wise to assign this employee projects or tasks that have social value. It can also help determine if your values are consistent with your goals and whether you're spending your time in a meaningful way. And values are relatively stable across time situations, as we've talked about. So we can apply those concepts to the working environment to better understand our employees, how to engage with them, and what they're looking for when it comes to job satisfaction, what's important to them. So some workplace attitudes are more potent than others. So we can think about organizational commitment, employee engagement, perceived organizational support, and of course, the most important, job satisfaction. So these attitudes measures different levels of these areas of engagement. So they represent important outcomes that managers may be working to enhance directly. They link to other significant outcomes that managers will want to improve where possible when they understand what their employees feel like they're missing, if they feel unappreciated, what their wants and needs are when it comes to the working environment. So organizational commitment's a big one. So the extent to which an employee identifies with the organization and is committed to its goals. So are they loyal? Do they like being there? Are they constantly looking for another job? Are they just putting in the hours until something else comes along? Or are they engaged with the organization? Do they want to be there? Do they think of this as not a job, but a career for them? And so, to kind of increase employee commitment, we can hire those whose personal values most align with the organization, build a level of trust between the employee and the organization to really get that engagement. And when we start to talk about engagement, we want to know the extent to which employees give it their all in their work roles. So, once again, are they just clocking in, collecting a paycheck, or are they actually engaged with our business? That employee engagement can kind of be defined as they're harnessing the organization's members themselves to work their roles and engagement people employ and express themselves. So this definition is the idea of engaged employees. So some of the things to think about and that we might study further include urgency, being focused, intensity, enthusiasm, and what they're doing every day. So another area is perceived organizational support. So the extent to which employees believe that the organization values their contributions and generally cares about their well-being. So does my employer actually care about me, or do they just care about my numbers? Do they just care about the production I provide or the service I provide? Am I just generating numbers for them? And that's how they value me, is based on what those numbers actually look like at the end of the day. Some other things this can be associated with is increased organizational commitment, job satisfaction, organizational citizenship behavior, task performance, and then lower turnover. Retention rate's really important. The cost of a new employee, bringing them in, training them, can take anywhere from 6 months to a year to get that cost back when you spend that time and energy training a new employee, trying to get them up to the production levels required for their job. Some other outcomes linked with job satisfaction when we think about attitudes, so motivation, job involvement, and then behavior. So job performance, how are they doing their job? Organizational systems behavior, counterproductive work behavior, and then turnover, that retention number. So some things that we can link with job satisfaction, whether or not employees stay with us, or how quickly they move on to another job or another organization. So research tells us that job satisfaction and performance are moderately related, indirectly influence each other, and better to consider a relationship at the business unit level versus the individual level. So what does it look like in the organization? What does it look like overall when it comes to that job satisfaction, and are my employees engaged? So some other areas to think about when we break this down, we can think about this from an organizational level. So we see a positive correlation for higher productivity and being efficient, lower costs, improved customer satisfaction, higher unit level satisfaction, and lower turnover. And then for the individual, some positive takes away. So improved job satisfaction again, reduced intention to quit, showing up to work, not being absent all the time, that lower retention rate. So lots of positives here when we think about job satisfaction. When we think about values, we understand the values of our employees, and then we try and affect that attitude piece by understanding the values, what's important to them, how do we, show our appreciation to them, how do we build that loyalty between us and the organization and our employees. So turnover is harmful to high-performing employees. Voluntary leave in the organization. Hire people who fit with the organization's culture. Spend time fostering employee engagement. Provide effective onboarding, and recognize and reward high-performing employees. So this is just a really high-level overview of when we think about attitudes and values and why they're important. How we can really talk about values in a meaningful way. When we looked at that theory wheel and all the things that goes into values, all the way they're kind of interconnected, being independent, then how does that external environment affect me? Those experiences and, my parents and my upbringing, how all those values are set in place and how they change over time as well from those external environments that can really shape our values. And then that leads to the connection of attitudes. So we see some example here of some phrasing of what that looks like. So when we see values, we're talking about what is important for you. And when we see attitudes, we say, what do you like or dislike? Our beliefs are views. Our beliefs are views. Superset of values, subset of attitudes, honest people, and then honesty. So we see that link there. So when we talk about values, there's that link to opposing values and different structures, in particular that external environment, and then how it connects to attitudes. And we look at this verbiage, how they're similar, but yet different from each other to help us understand the difference between values and attitudes. So we want to impact the employee within our organization. So we want to understand what their value system looks like. We want to understand the different values that they have and how those values relate to attitudes and how we can affect that when we understand their values, when we understand what's important to them. So we can change their attitudes, or we can have that attitude that's most beneficial to us as an organization. So that's a very high level overview of some theories and some concepts when it comes to values and attitudes and how we should think about it from an organizational perspective. Thank you for joining, guys. I greatly appreciate it. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you later.